Lord Jamar didn't just crack the door open on the biggest secret in pop music history. Honey, he allegedly kicked the whole thing off the hinges, and now the Beyoncé age conspiracy is burning down the internet all over again. Word traveling through the culture right now is that the Brand Nubian legend sat down and said the quiet part out loud, allegedly connecting dots that link Beyoncé, Jay-Z, Tina Knowles, and a birth year that some people swear was surgically removed from the record books. And listen, when a man with Lord Jamar's reputation for saying what nobody else will touch decides to plant his flag on the Beyoncé born in 1974 theory, you already know the timeline is about to be in shambles. Because this is not some random account with 12 followers screaming into the void. This is Lord Jamar, a man who has been in the industry since before some of y'all were even conceived, allegedly looking at her timeline and basically saying the math has never mattered. So buckle up, because what he allegedly said about how young she really was when Jay-Z came into the picture is about to have the Bayhive fighting for their lives in the comments. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why this rumor refuses to die no matter how many times it gets debunked. Now, for anybody who has been living under a rock, Lord Jamar has spent years building a reputation as one of the most unfiltered voices in hip-hop media. This is a man who does not water anything down for mainstream approval. Whether he is talking about hip-hop politics, industry gatekeepers, or the biggest celebrities on the planet, Lord Jamar addresses everything head-on, and that is exactly why people pay attention when he speaks. He is not chasing invites to anyone's cookout. He is not trying to get a feature. So when Lord Jamar decided to step directly into the long-running internet speculation surrounding Beyoncé's real age during an interview on The Art of Dialogue, the culture stopped scrolling. Because he didn't just mention it in passing. He went all the way in, questioning the entire public timeline of her life, from her birth year all the way to the age gap between her and Jay-Z when their relationship first began. And baby, this is where it starts getting sticky. During that Art of Dialogue conversation, Lord Jamar directly addressed the age difference between Beyoncé and Jay-Z, and he did not mince a single word. He described the timeline as flat-out abnormal, pointing out that Beyoncé was reportedly around 18, possibly even younger, when she and Jay-Z first connected, while Jay-Z was already hovering around 30 years old. Now, Lord Jamar didn't frame this as some innocent love story the way the mainstream media has packaged it for 2 decades. He used that exact situation to question the wider power dynamics between established industry titans and much younger artists during that era. And he even brought up the long-circulated rumors about Jay-Z allegedly dealing with Foxy Brown when she was extremely young too. If we are being real, Lord Jamar was painting a picture of a pattern, not an isolated romance. And when somebody with his platform starts framing it like that, people who have been sitting on this theory for years suddenly feel like they just got a cosign from hip-hop royalty. But here's the part that sent the internet into a full meltdown. The conversation took a hard left turn when the topic shifted to those internet theories claiming Beyoncé was actually born in 1974 instead of 1981. And according to how the exchange played out, Lord Jamar allegedly reacted in a way that people online described as a light bulb moment, like everything he had ever questioned about the situation suddenly clicked into place. Oh, wait a minute, now it all makes sense. That was allegedly the energy. Because think about what that 1974 theory actually does to the entire story. Under the official timeline, Beyoncé was born on September 4th, 1981, which would have made her a teenager in the late 90s when she was being spotted in grown folk spaces and connecting with a 30-year-old Jay-Z. But under the disputed 1974 timeline, Beyoncé would have already been a grown woman in her mid-20s at the turn of the millennium. And that one shift changes everything about how the story reads. See, the theory that Lord Jamar was chewing on suggests that Mathew Knowles and Tina Knowles would not have been panicking about Jay-Z circling their daughter, because under that disputed timeline, Beyoncé was not some teenager being swept up by an older man. She would have been roughly 25 or 26 around the beginning of the 2000s, fully grown, fully legal, fully aware. And for the people who ride with this theory, that is the missing puzzle piece they have been waving around for years. They argue that an older birth year explains exactly why the Knowles family seemed so comfortable with the relationship despite the reported age gap that had everybody else raising eyebrows. Why would a protective father manager and a hands-on mother sign off on their teenage daughter dating a man 12 years her senior? Well, according to the theorists, maybe she was never actually a teenager at all. Now, let me be crystal clear before the lawyers start stretching. The 1974 claim has never been verified by a single credible source, and publicly available biographical records identified Beyoncé's birth date as September 4th, 1981. That part is not in dispute anywhere official. But honey, Since when has a lack of official proof ever stopped the internet from building an entire case file? Because the internet has been stacking up supposed receipts on this for years, and once Lord Jamar gave the conversation fresh oxygen, every single one of those receipts got pulled right back out the archives. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, people who were actually around during that era constantly talked about how Beyoncé seemed unusually mature for her age. There were whispers floating around the clubs and the industry that she carried herself way older than what you would expect from a teenage girl. And one of the most repeated stories from that era involves nightclub sightings from 1998 and 1999, where Beyoncé was allegedly inside venues she was not even old enough to legally enter under the 1981 timeline. The way the story gets told, she was in the club, Jay was dating her, and if you do the math on Jay being about 30 at the time, the whole scene looks uncomfortable under the official dates. The people telling these stories back then framed it as a young girl being moved through adult spaces under heavy protection. But now, supporters of the conspiracy look back at those exact same stories and read them completely differently. They argue that if Beyoncé had actually been born in 1974, then she was never a teenager acting grown in those clubs. She was allegedly a woman in her mid-20s simply acting her real age while the machine presented her as younger to the public. That is a wild claim, but you can see why those old stories keep getting dragged back into the conversation every single time this debate heats up. And then comes what conspiracy believers treat as the crown jewel of their entire case, the alleged birth record. Some years back, a document started circulating online that people claimed a Texas civil servant had uncovered, and this document allegedly showed the name Knowles, Beyoncé Giselle, sitting right next to the date September 4th, 1974. Now you already know the internet lost its collective mind when that image started making the rounds. Screenshot after screenshot, repost after repost, with everybody zooming in like they were forensic analysts at Quantico. But here is the thing that always has to be said out loud. That document has never once been established as authentic. And in an era where a digitally altered image can be cooked up in 20 minutes on a laptop, a piece of paper on a screen proves absolutely nothing. Publicly available biographical records still say 1981. Every official database still says 1981. So the 1974 document remains exactly what it has always been, speculation dressed up in official-looking clothes. But the conspiracy crowd has an answer for that too, and this is where the thinking gets real creative. They argue that the Knowles family's influence in the industry makes them suspicious of the official records themselves. In their minds, if a family had enough power to build one of the most carefully managed images in entertainment history, then allegedly nothing on paper can be fully trusted either. Now, does that prove anyone altered a Texas birth record? Absolutely not. There is zero solid evidence showing that anybody touched a single document anywhere. But that does not stop the theory machine, because the moment you convince yourself that the official records are part of the cover-up, there is literally no evidence that could ever talk you out of it. And that, right there, is the engine that keeps this entire conspiracy running year after year. Then the theorists reached even further back, all the way into the 80s, and this is where Tina Knowles gets dragged straight into the fire. There is a story Tina Knowles herself has told about taking Beyoncé to see Michael Jackson during the legendary Victory-era shows at the Astrodome when Beyoncé was 3 years old. Tina described holding little Beyoncé in a crowd of about 20 people near an area where Michael was going to walk out. And according to her telling, Michael Jackson actually walked over and tried to grab baby Beyoncé, who was completely overwhelmed because she loved him so much. Now, on the surface, that is a sweet little family memory. But the internet detectives pulled out their calculators and immediately started screaming that the math was broken. Because here's where it gets messy. The shows people usually connect to that story happened in 1984. And if Beyoncé was born in September of 1981, she would have just turned 3 around that window, which actually lines up fine. But some versions of the story floating around online had people convinced the timing did not work, and they argued that she looked and acted older than 3 in the way the story was being described. Jumping straight back to 1974 to claim she would have been old enough to genuinely fangirl over Michael Jackson instead of being a toddler. Now, judging anybody's exact age from a 40-year-old memory is shaky at best, and old interviews get dates mixed up all the time. Parents misremember years. Celebrities tell stories without checking the exact timeline first. That alone does not prove a different birth year. But once that clip started making the rounds again, the floodgates opened all the way up, and suddenly everybody was asking whether she really looked 3 in the old footage, as if pixelated home videos from the 80s could settle a birth certificate dispute. But wait, because Tina Knowles is not the only parent who accidentally poured gasoline on this fire. Mathew Knowles got himself dragged into the debate too, and it was all because of comments he made during an interview on The Breakfast Club. Mathew was sitting there reminiscing about the early days of Destiny's Child, talking about the girl group battles of that era, when he casually said that Pink, who was leading a group out in LA at the time, was the exact same age as Beyoncé, and that Usher was the same age too, all of them being around 14 and 15 years old while they were living that grind. Now, that sounds harmless until you pull up the birth certificates of the people he named. Pink was born in 1979, Usher was born in 1978, and Beyoncé's publicly documented birth year is 1981. So the second Mathew Knowles grouped his own daughter in with artists born in 78 and 79, the conspiracy community treated it like the official timeline had just cracked on live radio. Which year are we supposed to believe? They started asking. 1981, 1979, 1978, or the Holy Grail, 1974? Now, let's be fair for half a second. Any parent who managed a teenage supergroup through that chaos could easily round ages up or down while telling a 20-year-old story. People misspeak. Memories blur. Mathew Knowles grouping his daughter with her peers in a casual interview is not a sworn affidavit. But the internet did not care about context, because by that point the narrative had already taken on a life of its own. Theorists started claiming that the family had changed the story so many times they allegedly could not even keep their own dates straight anymore. And look, that accusation remains pure speculation. Nobody has ever proven that anyone deliberately lied about anything. But when you stack Mathew's Breakfast Club moment on top of Tina's Michael Jackson memory on top of the alleged Texas document, you can see how the pile starts looking like a mountain to people who already want to believe. And this is exactly where Lord Jamar's bigger argument slides into place, because his point was never just about one birthday. Lord Jamar was tapping into something much older and much uglier. The music business has always placed a premium on youth and marketability, and artists have been squeezed over their public age for decades. This is not a theory. It is documented industry behavior. Nicki Minaj's age became a whole public discussion after reporting around a 2011 police document listed a birth year that did not match some of the earlier claims that had been circulating about her. Rebel Wilson went through her own age controversy when Australian reporting challenged the younger age that had been floating around publicly and reported that she was actually older. Even Michael Jackson's age and public image got debated for years. And Gabrielle Union has spoken openly about age discrimination in Hollywood, especially the pressure female performers face when they are fighting for auditions in an industry that treats youth like currency. So when Lord Jamar questions whether Beyoncé's age was packaged a certain way, he is plugging into a very real, very documented pattern of the entertainment machine shaving years off women to keep them marketable. That context matters. That context is real. What remains unproven is whether Beyoncé's specific timeline was ever actually altered, and that gap between real industry pattern and unproven personal claim is exactly where this whole debate lives. Speaking of Gabrielle Union, because of course the internet found a way to pull her directly into the Beyoncé age debate too. There is a quote attributed to Gabrielle from back in 2008, where she said that she and Beyoncé had been friends since they were teenagers. Now read that again slowly, because the internet certainly did. Gabrielle Union was born in 1972. Beyoncé's documented birth year is 1981. That is a 9-year gap. So when Gabrielle allegedly described them as teenage friends, people online immediately started doing the math and arguing that the timeline sounded off. A girl born in 1972 stops being a teenager in 1992. A girl born in 1981 does not even become a teenager until 1994. So when, exactly, were these two teenagers at the same time? That is the question the conspiracy crowd keeps hammering. But here is what has to be said. The quote by itself does not establish when their friendship actually began, and without the full original context of that 2008 interview, it cannot prove that Beyoncé has a different birth year. Friends stretch language all the time. People say we have been friends since we were kids loosely. Still, the believers point out that Gabrielle has never publicly walked back or clarified that specific comment, and they treat her silence like a confession. Every single time her age trends, that Gabrielle quote resurfaces like clockwork. But somebody choosing not to respond to an internet theory is not evidence that the theory is true. Silence is not a signature on a sworn statement, no matter how loudly the comment sections pretend otherwise. And just when you think the receipt pile cannot get any taller, in walks Jaguar Wright with a claim that sent the theorists into orbit. Jaguar Wright previously alleged that she remembered seeing a Destiny's Child era profile, reportedly in Vibe magazine, that contained a family photograph labeled 1981. According to Wright, the child standing in that photograph did not look like a newborn at all. She described the little girl as standing up, close to hip height next to her mother, and Wright basically said she had never seen an infant that large in her life. Her question was simple, and it was brutal. If Beyoncé was born in 1981, how is she standing tall in a picture that is also labeled 1981? Why are they saying she was born in 81 when she looks 4 years old in the photograph? Now, you can hear exactly why that claim caught fire. It is vivid. It is specific. It paints a picture, literally. But here is the problem, and it is a big one. Judging a child's exact age from an old photograph is incredibly unreliable under the best circumstances. And in this case, nobody has the original magazine issue. Nobody has verified the date printed on that page. Nobody has the complete context of what that caption actually said or when that photo was actually taken. Jaguar Wright has maintained that the issue she remembers is real, and maybe she genuinely believes every word of what she saw. But without the original publication available for verification, her recollection remains an allegation, not evidence. Memory is not a document. And this particular receipt, as juicy as it sounds, has gaps you could drive a tour bus through. But honey, the rabbit hole goes deeper than a magazine memory, because another supposed receipt came from an alleged former Columbia Records employee, and this is where the story swerves from messy into full-blown chaos. This person claimed they once glimpsed information on a manager's computer that listed a 1974 birth date for Beyoncé. And they did not stop there. The same source reportedly tied that claim to one of the most extreme rumors floating around the edges of this whole saga. A rumor involving her sister Solange and questions about her parentage, suggesting that her age was allegedly adjusted to bury a family secret. Now, let me stop right there, because this needs to be said with a full chest. There is no credible evidence anywhere establishing that allegation, and every piece of publicly available information identifies Beyoncé and Solange as sisters. Period. But the story gets even more tangled, because the source allegedly claimed the rumor was repeated by a relative named Angie, who supposedly got upset with her after some family Christmas gathering and started telling staff members that the family was hiding something massive. The source even tried connecting old comments about Beyoncé's body shape to this theory, and at that point, we are so far past evidence that we are basically reading tea leaves at a family cookout. Secondhand gossip allegedly shared in the middle of a personal dispute is not proof of anything, let alone something this serious. And what you have to understand is that there are really multiple separate theories getting blended into one giant smoothie here. One theory says her age was shaved down because the music industry wanted to sell her as younger and more marketable. A completely different theory tries to weld the age question to rumors about Solange. Neither one of them has been established by credible evidence, but online, they get mashed together until people cannot even remember which claim came from where. What keeps the entire conversation breathing is the pile of supposed inconsistencies that people keep collecting like trading cards. Lord Jamar questioning the timeline out loud added a recognizable, credible in the culture voice to an already messy pop culture conspiracy, and that matters more than people realize. Because when somebody with Lord Jamar's history of challenging industry narratives starts asking questions, the people who already believe feel validated. He is not some anonymous Reddit account. He is Lord Jamar. And his willingness to say it out loud tells the believers they are not crazy for asking. But here is where I need everybody to take a breath, because questioning something and proving something are two completely different universes. And there is one detail in this entire debate that cannot be ignored no matter how many receipts get stacked. Beyoncé has lived under the most intense public microscope of any entertainer of her generation, and she has been there since she was an actual child. Her childhood performances on Star Search are on tape. The Destiny's Child years are documented down to the hairstyles. Decades of interviews, family history, career milestones, award shows, behind-the-scenes footage, all of it has been cataloged by cameras the entire way. Changing a 7-year stretch of a timeline that documented would require far more than one questionable document, one misremembered concert story, and one parent's loose grouping of ages on a morning radio show. You are talking about school records, medical records, hundreds of witnesses from Houston who watched these girls grow up in real time. The scale of what would have to be faked is the strongest argument the skeptics have, and honestly, it is a pretty strong one. Still, that has not stopped the digging, not even for a single news cycle. Some conspiracy believers have gone as far as suggesting that the Knowles family somehow had old material scrubbed from the internet. Old magazine scans, archived interviews, early press kits that supposedly told a different story before they allegedly vanished. And to be fair to reality, there is no verified evidence showing that happened. Things disappear from the internet every single day for boring reasons. Sites shut down. Scans get taken offline over copyright claims. Magazines from 1999 were never digitized in the first place. But when a theory needs the evidence to be missing, A missing page stops being an accident and starts looking like a cover-up. That is the trap this whole conversation keeps falling into. Absence of evidence gets treated as evidence of absence having been arranged. And once you accept that logic, the theory can never lose, because every empty archive just proves how deep the cleaning allegedly went. And that is exactly why this story gets recycled every few years like clockwork, and why Lord Jamar stepping into it right now matters so much. Watch the pattern, because it never changes. An old interview resurfaces. Somebody remembers a date differently. A clip of Tina Knowles telling the Michael Jackson story starts circulating again. Mathew Knowles says 14 and 15 on the Breakfast Club. The Gabrielle Union quote gets screenshotted for the 900th time. And then the internet detectives pull out the calculators and start doing the math all over again like they are uncovering a brand new secret, when really they are just rereading the same 10 pages the culture has been passing around for 15 years. One person points at Mathew, another person drags Tina into it. Somebody else hauls Gabrielle Union back into the conversation, and before long the exact same disputed timeline is moving across social media with the energy of breaking news. But here is the thing that separates people who analyze stories from people who just collect them. A pile of strange comments does not automatically transform into proof just because the pile is tall. That is not how evidence works. That is how vibes work. People misremember dates constantly. Parents mix up years when they tell old stories. Yours do it. Mine do it. Everybody's family has that one story where the year changes depending on who is telling it. Celebrities give interviews without checking a timeline first, because nobody lives their life with a notary public in the room. And old clips get chopped up, stripped of context, and reposted with captions that practically dare you to be outraged. That is why these supposed receipts can look absolutely insane on the surface while still falling short of proving that Beyoncé's documented birth year is wrong. Every individual receipt has a boring explanation. But the conspiracy does not survive on any individual receipt. It survives on the stack. It survives on the feeling that there is just too much smoke for there to be no fire anywhere. And feelings, as we all know, are the hardest thing on the internet to argue with. Now let's talk about the piece of this puzzle that Lord Jamar put the most weight on, because it is the part of the conversation that makes people the most uncomfortable, and honestly, it is the part that deserves the most serious attention. Strip away the birth certificates and the magazine photos for a second. And what Lord Jamar was really doing on the art of dialogue was putting a spotlight on the power dynamics of that entire era. His point was bigger than Beyoncé. His point was about what it meant for young women to come up in an industry where the gatekeepers were grown men with all the money, all the access, and all the leverage. He framed the Jay-Z situation as part of a pattern he had watched for decades. Established stars connecting with much younger women whose careers, tours, and futures ran through the same rooms those men controlled. And whether you think his read on this specific relationship is fair or not, that broader conversation about the 90s and early 2000s music business is one that a whole lot of people have been having ever since. The industry of that era does not have a spotless record, and Lord Jamar has never been the type to pretend otherwise for the sake of being polite. That is why his voice lands differently than a random page with a conspiracy graphic. When Lord Jamar says the situation looked abnormal to him at the time, he is speaking as somebody who was actually inside the culture, moving through the same industry, watching how the machine worked from a front row seat. His credibility on the mechanics of the business is the whole reason his cosign on this theory traveled so far, so fast. And it is also why the pushback against him has been just as loud, because critics of his take argue, pretty reasonably, that being an industry veteran does not turn a rumor into a record. Knowing how the machine works and proving that one specific machine altered one specific birth year are two entirely different mountains to climb, and so far, nobody has brought climbing gear for the second one. Meanwhile, you already know the Bayhive did not take any of this lying down. The moment the Lord Jamar clips started circulating, the Beyoncé defense force mobilized like it was a national emergency, and their counterattack was actually pretty organized. They pulled the documented receipts of their own, the Star Search appearances from the early 90s showing a little girl who matched the official timeline, the early Destiny's Child press materials, the school-era photos from Houston, the interviews from 1998 and 1999 where teen magazines covered the group as teenage girls, complete with the kind of cringe teen beat coverage that simply would not exist in that form for a group of grown women. They pointed out that her entire coming of age played out in front of cameras, journalists, classmates, and an entire Houston community that watched these girls grow up in public. And their closing argument is the one skeptics keep coming back to. A lie this size would need thousands of people to stay silent for over 30 years. Teachers, neighbors, childhood friends, early collaborators, journalists who interviewed her as a teenager in real time. Secrets do not survive that many mouths. That is the wall this theory has never been able to climb, and no amount of screenshot math has found a door in it yet. And just when the conversation was finally starting to cool off, here comes Lord Jamar pouring an entire tanker of gas on it at the exact moment the culture was already on edge about everything connected to the Carters. Because timing matters in this game, and the timing here could not be more loaded. Jay-Z has spent the last stretch fighting off some of the ugliest accusations of his entire career, the kind of headlines that make people re-examine everything they thought they knew about the early days. And whether that is fair or not, it has created an environment where every old story involving Jay-Z and a young Beyoncé is getting pulled back out and read under a completely different light. Lord Jamar knows exactly what he is doing stepping into that atmosphere. This is a man who has spent years criticizing Jay-Z publicly, questioning his legacy, his politics, his place in the culture, so nobody is pretending this is a neutral observer stumbling onto the topic. The theorists hear a fearless truth-teller finally saying what the industry is too scared to say. The skeptics hear a longtime critic of Jay-Z reaching for the oldest rumor in the bag. And honestly, both of those reads being possible at the same time is exactly what makes this whole thing so combustible. Now here is the question that has the comment sections absolutely eating each other alive. And it is the one Lord Jamar's interview really leaves sitting on the table. Let's say, just hypothetically, just for the sake of the thought experiment, that there was something to the older birth year. Who benefits? Because follow the logic the theorists actually use. If Beyoncé was older when she connected with Jay-Z, then the uncomfortable age gap story that people have whispered about for 20 years evaporates overnight. The parents' comfort level suddenly makes sense. The club sightings make sense. The maturity everybody kept remarking on makes sense. In a strange way, the conspiracy theory does not even paint Beyoncé as the villain of the story. It paints her as the product of a machine that allegedly decided a younger age would sell better, while she just played the role that was handed to her. That is why this theory has such unusual staying power compared to most celebrity conspiracies. It lets people question the industry without having to hate the artist. It is a cover-up story where the alleged cover-up arguably protected everybody involved. And a conspiracy with no villain is a conspiracy with no natural ending. Nobody ever has to face a consequence, so the story never has to close. And before we get to the verdict, let's give the context its full weight, because there is a reason this specific theory hits different from every other celebrity rumor on the internet. Most conspiracies accuse somebody of doing something terrible. This one accuses the most powerful family machine in modern music of doing something that, if true, was arguably a business decision dressed up as biography. That is why it spreads so easily at family gatherings, in group chats, in barbershops, in comment sections, because repeating it does not require you to hate Beyoncé at all. You can be a full-blown fan, streaming every album, defending her in every argument, and still lean over and whisper, but you do know that 1974 thing is kind of strange, right? That is the genius of the theory's design, whether it was designed or not. It recruits believers without demanding they surrender their fandom. And a rumor that lets you keep your idols is a rumor with an unlimited shelf life, because it will never force anybody to choose between the story and the star. Lord Jamar understood that tension when he leaned into it. He is not asking anybody to stop loving the music. He is asking them to look at the packaging. And in an industry where packaging is everything, that question alone is enough to keep this whole thing immortal. And let's zoom out for a second, because if you really want to understand why the Beyoncé age story keeps resurrecting, you have to look at the ecosystem that feeds it. Celebrity age conspiracies are their own genre of internet content now. There are entire communities that do nothing but archive old interviews, freeze-frame old footage, and cross-reference public records against magazine profiles from 25 years ago. Avril Lavigne has been fighting a replacement theory for 2 decades. Lorde got accused of being 40 years old when she dropped her first album as a teenager. Britney Spears, Lady Gaga, Nicki Minaj, Rebel Wilson. The list of women whose ages have been litigated by strangers with calculators is longer than most tour writers. And it is almost always women, because the industry taught the public that a woman's age is a marketable product feature, and once people believe a number is part of the packaging, they start treating that number like a label they have a right to inspect. Beyoncé just happens to sit at the very top of that pyramid, the biggest star, the most controlled image, the most disciplined operation, which makes her the ultimate target for people who believe the packaging must be hiding something. The tighter the image control, the louder the theory that something is being controlled. So where does that leave us, after Lord Jamar dragged the whole thing back into the light? It leaves us exactly where this story always ends up, balanced on the same knife edge it has been sitting on for over a decade. On one side, you have a documented, heavily photographed, publicly witnessed life that matches the September 4th, 1981 birth date on every official record that exists. On the other side, you have a stack of loose quotes, family stories with wobbly dates, one unverified document, a magazine memory, and a music industry with a genuine, well-documented history of lying about women's ages for profit. Neither side is going anywhere. The receipts do not prove the theory, and the theory does not need proof to survive. It only needs the next resurfaced clip, the next unguarded interview, the next Lord Jamar willing to say the quiet part into a microphone. And based on how fast this latest round spread, there will be a next time. There is always a next time. But now I need to hear from y'all, because this one is not a quiet comment type of topic. Was Beyoncé really born in 1981 like every documented record says? Or do you think there is something real buried underneath this 1974 theory that has refused to die for 15 years? Do you think Lord Jamar is a fearless voice putting the industry on blast? Or a man with a long history of coming for Jay-Z who knew exactly which button to press? And what about that Gabrielle Union quote, innocent figure of speech, or the slip that keeps on slipping? Get in the comments and let me know where you stand, because I will be down there reading every single one. And if this breakdown had you locked in from start to finish, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you are new, and share this with somebody who still thinks this rumor started last week. Because baby, if you thought the age conversation was deep, wait until you hear what the internet is saying about the Destiny's Child contracts, and who really owned what back in 1999. That story is even crazier, and it is coming next.